Not Merriam-Webster. Poverty defined and measured. How should we define and measure poverty in the United States? So this is a two-part question and will be answered as such. We will start with the definition. We believe poverty should be defined as those who experience poverty lack sufficient monetary resources relative to the needs of society and therefore are deprived of the essential capabilities. Additionally, we think it should be measured through a combination of the Supplemental Poverty Measure and Human Development Index, but more details to follow in that regard. We need to first explore this definition. Those who experience poverty lack sufficient monetary resources relative to the needs of society and therefore are deprived of essential capabilities. We use the phrase experience poverty with the intention to treat those in such situations with dignity and respect, as poverty should not be a reflection on them as individuals, but rather their experiences. The phrase lack monetary resources refers to the importance of money in order to provide for one's household, and we say relative to the needs of society because the amount of monetary resources needed is determined by variable costs of living, as well as the different things that may be necessary in one society but not in another. John Ashlyn, an author and sociology professor, defines poverty in reference to economic or income deprivation. Lastly, central capabilities. Capabilities encompass all one is able to do or be. Central capabilities indicate the ones we deem necessary, which we will explain later. While the idea of financial stability stemmed from Ashlyn, the idea of capabilities came from Amartya Sen, an economist and philosopher, and Martha Nussbaum, another philosopher. So what are capabilities? In essence, capabilities are groups of functioning, or more specifically, all the possible combinations of your functionings. Additionally, capabilities can be defined as groups of functionings. Functionings are what you do or become. Capabilities encompass all of the possible combinations of your functionings. Nussbaum defines functionings as active realization of one or more capabilities. Examples of functionings may be playing tennis, being healthy, being able to drive, or being able to speak. Many things can be considered functionings as they are relative to the individual. The idea behind this capabilities approach is to ensure that human beings are living quality lives rather than simply surviving. Of this, Sen says the approach is based on a view of living as a combination of various doings and beings, with quality of life to be assessed in terms of the capability to achieve valuable functionings. While Sen and Nussbaum both focus on capabilities, Nussbaum is the one to actually list specific ones. These are called central capabilities, and these are the ones we believe are important to include. Life, so being able to live a normal length life. Bodily health, which refers to good health, adequate nourishment, and adequate shelter. Bodily integrity, which means feeling a sense of security and in control of one's body. Senses, imagination, and thought, which refer to one's ability to experience the world through the 5 basic senses, as well as create and process ideas freely. Emotions, so feeling attachment to other people and things. Practical reason, meaning the ability to reflect and differentiate good from bad. Affiliation, referring to the ability to live with others in a sense of consideration and respect. And lastly, control over one's environment, which is broken down into 2 categories. Political, referring to the opportunity for political participation, and material, referring to the ownership of property. Overall, we believe that poverty is too complex to simply be defined by low income, as many would have it. While we believe that sufficient monetary funds should be considered in the definition, these central capabilities we have pictured here need to be heavily considered, as they keep intact the importance of human dignity and choice when defining poverty.
So next we'll talk about how to measure poverty. The U.S. currently measures poverty with the official poverty measure, or the OPM. The OPM measures the poverty threshold as the economy food plan times 3. Counted in the OPM are families and unrelated individuals. However, foster children, those experiencing homelessness, and any individuals not living at home, such as college students, are excluded in this poverty universe. As you can see, the OPM leaves out significant sections of people, thus making the poverty measure less accurate. Beyond that, it also only takes into consideration cash income and doesn't look at the expenses that can affect one's income, such as transportation and childcare. While the OPM is a good baseline measurement, we do not believe it shows an accurate picture of what poverty looks like. Poverty just cannot be defined by a single number. The OPM is an absolute measure, which means it is insensitive to what other people have or make. For example, a pencil is 3 inches long. The size of the pencil doesn't change when there are other pencils. In contrast to the absolute measure is the relative measure. Relative measurement takes other people into account, such as when looking at the median income. The median income changes based on what the incomes of others. Some of the issues with OPM are addressed with the SPM, or the Supplemental Poverty Measure. The SPM is quasi-relative, which means it has both relative and absolute aspects. We agree with Ashlyn's view when he says that the SPM is conceptually and practically the most viable and useful type of general poverty measure in the United States. The SPM measures poverty level as 33% of median expenditures times 1.2, which takes into account what other people are spending on expenditures. The expenditures considered are called the FCSU. The expenditures considered are food, clothing, shelter, and utilities. Because the SPM takes into account expenses, it makes sense that the poverty rate is higher in comparison to the OPM, making the SPM more accurate. We believe that the SPM should be used because it takes into account geographic differences. Living in New York City versus living in Lexington, Virginia have very different costs. Also, the SPM accounts for more than just cash income. It also considers in-kind benefits such as SNAP, the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, and TANF, which is temporary assistance for needy families. For the SPM, expenses and taxes are subtracted from the cash income and in-kind benefits. Because the SPM takes more factors associated with poverty into consideration, we believe that it is a much better measure of poverty than the OPM. It, however, doesn't take into account capabilities because this SPM only measures physical aspects of poverty. It gives a more accurate, but still not a complete, picture of poverty. The lack of addressing capabilities in the SPM is why we believe that the SPM should be paired with the HDI, or Human Developmental Index. This is a measuring proxy because it's the closest we get to measuring capabilities. There are 3 aspects to the HDI. The first is life expectancy. Since this can be measured, this aids in the measurement and understanding of capabilities, such as life, bodily health, and bodily integrity, which are difficult to be measured directly. For example, having a greater life expectancy can indicate that you have bodily health. The second aspect of HDI is education. Capabilities associated with education can include practical reasons, senses, imagination, and thought, and control over one's environment. For example, having a higher education can mean being a more active member of society, such as politically. The last aspect is gross national income, which is the income of the nation before taxes are taken into account. Capabilities associated with this aspect can include control over one's environment and life. For example, a higher gross national income can mean that citizens have the ability and choice to own more property, which ties into the property aspect of control over one's environment. We believe that HDI is a good measure of poverty because it quantitatively and directly measures capabilities, an important part of our definition. It is important to note that, however, it does not measure all the capabilities by proxy. It's a quick snapshot. So our measurement of poverty, which is SPM and HDI, doesn't correlate with our definition of poverty, which takes into account capabilities. This is so because capabilities technically can't be measured directly, are too subjective, and difficult to execute on a large scale when taking into account everyone's varied capabilities. We believe that it is important to note that this doesn't change how we define poverty, but rather demonstrates the difficulty in measuring it. In summary, the definition of poverty is that those who experience poverty lack sufficient monetary resources relative to society's needs, and therefore lack central capabilities. The main focus of poverty measurement should be with the SPM and HDI. While this isn't a perfect measurement of poverty, There is no perfect measure. We believe this gives the most complete picture of what poverty is.